Yes, yes, it's coming.
She can hear me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Deepaji. When did you get in? I got in a couple of days ago, and how is it? And I'm good. When are you here until?
I'm here. Well, I've got a red eye tomorrow, so I know I'm in and out of the thing. I've got it for a couple of days.
Do you want to get lunch or something?
No, good. I've got a couple of lunchtime meetings, but
Okay.
I was going to ask, are you around later? Because I think we've got a bar.
Let me know.
Yeah.
I have to run at 6 because I have a live program at 7.
Okay.
But maybe I'm done at 7:30.
Okay. Right.
So-
Yeah. Because I think we've got a bar book somewhere nearby. And
Yeah.
I was thinking that'd be great.
Let me know.
How's your year been?
It's just been like everything has just been baby life,
Yeah.
and he's not a baby anymore.
Yeah,
So
you remember you saying like he's coming into is he still coming into the office?
Yeah,
Yeah.
oh, he does.
Yeah.
Trying to find a good picture recently that I sent of him. I know he's so big. He's like a little man.
He's like a little independent human.
He really is. He's a whole human being now instead of like a lump of,
Like,
And he
he's
told
starting, I mean, I know he's still at home, but are you starting to think of like
No.
another one? You're like,
daycare.
my
He's
God.
been in daycare since September, and it's like a revolving door of sickness.
Oh.
I feel like I'm immune to everything now.
I know.
This past winter, I've gotten everything, so super strong. But yeah, no, life
He's
is
got
good.
really super bright eyes.
Oh, I know.
He
It's.
looks so inquisitive.
I sent it to you. I texted you. Yeah.
It's got you.
All right. Yes. Good luck.
The only way we can get audio in is through a microphone.
That's fine. That's fine. So listen, it's gonna be, they're gonna take turns speaking like yesterday. So if you have to go there and move it, or just tell the panelists that if you could just please move this for whoever's speaking. Tell them to do it, yeah.
So we need to put it like wrap it here so it comes together with it. Hold on a second. You just think you've got rubber band. There's not. And then you can use the clip to get rubber band then maybe. And then we don't need.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, because then we'll be passing that right around.
Room full of women, everyone has a rubber band or a scrunchie or something.
Yeah. Because then we'll forget.
There we go. Oh. Can I?
Yeah, go ahead. There's a little bit of a delay, but it's coming through, yeah. Yeah, go ahead. There's a little bit of a delay, but it's coming through, yeah. Yeah, go ahead. There's a little bit of a delay, but it's coming through, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so otherwise I'm just gonna. That picking up the sound on you? I can't lift up the mic, so I'm literally having to bend it.
You can use this one as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to turn off that. Good.
All right, well, yeah, thank you so much everyone who has joined us. So yeah, as you can see, our parallel event is period poverty beyond the products. So a little introduction. So I'm Beth Bolton. I'm with the Sikh Human Rights Group. So we're an NGO with men exop status. We gave that in 2015. And as a NGO overall, we focus on promoting right-based approaches and pluralistic language in actions and also in legislation, and kind of aiming for more of a inclusivity across the world. So in terms of my role, I work on mostly leading up the agenda and the diversity project that we hold. So for the past 2 years, we've been advocating for the reform on how we discuss menstruation and aiming to ensure it prioritises an effort to address gender discrimination and menstrual injustice. So we've been vocal about this topic for a long time, and we've tried to bring it up at various events. So for instance, at the last 3 COPs, we brought it up at COP26, COP27 and COP28. With COP27, they highlighted that women and girls are 40 times more likely to die due to climate change, and emphasised the need that we need more inclusion in the decision-making tables, and so making sure there's representation. And our question to that was, how do you expect women and girls to be at those tables if they can't go to school, if they can't go to work due to lack of access and education? So this will be our third time holding a parallel event with CSW, and yesterday we held a side event on a similar topic. And each time we've explored the barriers to the sustainable menstruation at CSW 66. Last year we looked at selective innovation around menstruation. And this year we're obviously stepping, as you can see, the period poverty, as the theme is women and girls in poverty. So our goal is to shed light on the broader implications of period poverty. So it begins with language. So even when we use the term period, we are often only referring to the bleed. And it's also a code word that we're referring to the bleed during the menstrual cycle rather than the entire cycle. So that's our biggest thing at the moment, is that, again, what we're focusing on is just one part of the entire cycle. So that's bringing it back to the fact that language is really important when it comes to the topic. When we use the term period poverty, often what we kind of look at is lack of access to items. We assume that once that issue has been fixed, once everyone's got access to items, period poverty is eradicated. And hoping that through this event, what we'll explore and through kind of collaboration with yourselves and discussing during the event, we're trying to keep it quite open with the audience. But it's to discuss kind of how period poverty is so much more than just lack of access to items. It's lack of research into the menstrual disorders, lack of representation, lack of work on legislation, and it's really looking at how we're fitting in a world that fits on a 24-hour cycle with demand menstruating. It's not really allowing the space, it's not really accommodating for those who are working on a cycle that changes throughout 28 days, whatever it looks like that individual. That's what we're hoping to explore. And I think that then working with wonderful panelists from their different fields, we're going to look at kind of how we need to include more and a broader discussion around the environmental impacts and how that leads to period poverty, the mental health impacts from stigma and taboo, and how that then leads to lack of education, the legislation that has happened that still needs to happen, and again the lack of medical research. So I will introduce our panelists of who you're actually here to speak to or to listen to. So we have had a last minute change, but I have to give addition to the panel, so I'll kind of go into that in a moment. But we first have just speak in a wave as well, just to make sure everyone knows. We've got Dr. Olivia on. So she's the co-founder of JUS. And this was created removing permanent waste from your bathroom and our planet, microplastic-free flushable period products. Olivia is passionate about reinforcing the conversation of the burden of sustainability away from the shoulders of the individual consumer and back to the hands of the corporations designing, developing, and selling the products that make up waste. Next we have Smith, PhD, Dr. Regal. She is a development psychologist and university professor and passionate advocate for children, human rights, and social justice. She serves as an advisor to the Milan Foundation, a non-profit organisation thriving to educate and empower girls in India. Through private participation, consulting, and community organisations, she champions neurodiversity, youth mentorship, and poverty alleviation. She developed guidelines for the assessment of children with autism and designed the psycho-educational assessment of the diverse learning in Europe. So far, strong on that. We have next Tandy people. So Tandy is an outreach liaison at the US Senate and is a passionate gender justice advocate. She's just been committed to gender justice work through organisations like Sikh Family Centre. She is the first and the Little Happiness Foundation. Notably, Tandy was the youngest speaker at the Parliament of the World Religion in 2021 and has previously worked in the International Religion Freedom Secretariat. Recently, Tandy was selected for the Global EAGLE program for global leaders, and her passion lies at the intersection of foreign and global actions, particularly understanding how these dynamics impact marginalized and vulnerable communities. My next source here now. So we were going to have the representative of the WHO, but I think a very, very strong standing and from a medical background. So again, it's going to really kind of cover the same topics. I'm probably better. You're not tied to what they have to say. So we have Dr. She is currently the director of the Standing Committee on the Sexual Reproductive Health Rights, including HIV and AIDS, for the INSA, which is the International Federation of Medical Students Association. She's a medical doctor by profession and started her journey in SRHR advocacy early on in her career. Her work is mainly being centered around health, education, and reproductive and mental health. So yes, a strong panel, as you can see, and hopefully going to really cover a variety of positions as we discuss inequality beyond the products. So we were going to play video, but sound is not quite good, so we will pass over to our speakers. So I'm going to kind of just ask them some questions, and they will elaborate a bit more about the work they're doing and the topic as we run back this microphone. And then when they can get up to the panel and actually audience rather and have hopefully a bit more of an interactive dialogue. As the co-founder and CEO of JUS, the world's first certified menstrual pad, can you elaborate on how food poverty intersects with the broader issues of climate change and its disproportionate impact on women and girls?
Thank you so much, Brandon. Thank you all. It's great to see you. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking about the intersectionality between gender and climate change. It is personally quite something that has driven me to my work for the last few years, but there's two particular facets that I would like to focus on today. Firstly, it is around climate change is not gender neutral. What do I mean by that? Women's vulnerability, women and girls' vulnerability to climate change stems from three main factors. So social, economical, and cultural. With women and girls experiencing the greatest impacts of climate change, amplifying any existing gender inequalities poses unique threats to their livelihoods, health, and safety. This can come across in several different ways. Women have often limited access to and control of environmental services. They also typically have limited access and participation in the decision-making and typically limited involvement in the distribution of the environmental management benefits. Consequently, this means that women and girls are less able to manage and tackle the existence and the outputs of climate change. Climate change is an added stressor onto an existing natural disasters or war. So this brings us to the second facet, which is that climate change is a threat multiplier, meaning that it escalates existing social, political, and economic tensions in an already fragile and conflict-affected setting. When natural disasters or wars strike, climate change will further exacerbate, driving that conflict across there, increasing their vulnerability to gender-based violence, including conflict-related sexual violence, human trafficking, child marriage, and other forms of specific gender-based violence. Also, when natural disasters strike, women are less likely to survive, more likely to be injured due to the increased disparities in information, mobility, decision-making, and often being tied to the existing vulnerable people who live at home with them, typically the older generation or children. That means that women are often faced with the fact that they are less likely to survive due to that. However, in spite of this vulnerability, women should not only be seen as the victims of climate change, however, they are the most active and effective agents and promoters of adaptation and mitigation. When women's priorities and needs are reflected in the development planning and funding, that means that they are part of the decision-making at national, local levels, not only allocation, distribution, and execution of these resources. That changes a huge amount in terms of where it goes. It is important to ensure gender-sensitive investments as well within not just products and services, but ensuring that there is a well-rounded output in terms of funding aspects as well. The intersectionality of gender inequality and climate crisis requires a collective action from these events that we hold, from the UN chronicles that are published every single year. And by throwing this lens wide, and I really was passionate about starting to talk about climate change and gender in general, exhibiting within this context, I would like to then narrow down specifically into menstrual products, because that is something that, of course, is often used by women and girls, but then is often neglected when we're talking about changes towards that. So that's when I would reflect on the sort of stats that I've put on slides here. So every single year, the 260 billion pads being sold and used worldwide, each of those pads have three outcomes. They're either incinerated, they're either sent to landfill, or they can end up in waterways or oceans, causing blockages and pollution. This current way of consumption is quite literally drowning us in permanent waste. And something that my panelists will go on to talk about is the added not benefit, but the added implication of the taboo around what is seen as often and coined an unhygienic or dirty of waste, which means that it often, when we think about landfills, it is an unsightly thing that often Western countries ship out into different markets, in further exacerbating that intersectionality within that climate change output. But then when we start to address some of these, when we look back at how we addressed these in the past, we often see that we only look at one half of the cycle. By changing and swapping the materials out, we address the beginning of life, but we are often left unanswered at the end of life, because even if you have a biodegradable product, it can still end up in an incinerator where it can't biodegrade. It can end up in a landfill, but given it enough time and the right conditions, it may degrade. And then also, if you end up wrongly being put into the waterways or into the oceans, it will very much struggle to degrade properly. And so this is where I strongly believe it is not really within the power of us as consumers to make that. It is really within the manufacturers and people who are producing these products to have a real responsibility. And this is where I really would champion for regulatory and also legislation change to ensure that we're able to hold these companies accountable for the waste that they produce. My background is that I've set up a material technology company to try and address some of these problems. And one of the first products that we developed is a flushable pad. I won't dwell too long on this, but everything in this product is completely biodegradable, but it expands your end of life. It doesn't mean that you have to end up in a bin. You can put it into a bucket of water, you can flush it down your toilet. When you flush it down your toilet, it is disintegrated and gone within 30 days. So something that will be degraded into water, biogas, and fertilizer before the next period. So yeah, that's a bit about it.
So I know we started on the pads and we have some period products, or rather period poverty beyond the products, but I think it is definitely important, as you have mentioned, because of the climate and the impact that it has on the girls and then contributes to their poverty. So next we have give the mic to in a moment. So New York removed the tampon tax in 2016.
one of the panels. Such an honor to here amongst you all. Though professionally I work for the majority leader of the U.S. Senate, today I'm honored to represent the only national gender justice and family violence-based organization in the Sikh community, Sikh Family Center. A common theme discussed at our organization is that the health of a community starts at home. And here, I'll say that the health of the world starts at home. Eleanor Roosevelt famously said, "Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home. So close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world, yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood they live in, the school or college they attend, the factory, farm, or office wherever they live. If we are to create vibrant communities, successful nations, and the betterment of all, including the sustainable world, what we call in our community, we must start at home. Oftentimes during larger conversations at this level, policy, global change, action, we lose sight of the very real change women are creating in their homes on a daily basis and the burden that they have on their shoulders to do so. In 2016, when the tampon tax was the hottest topic in local New York government and in private beneficiary corporations, it was still a very, very quiet topic in many New York immigrant communities, including my own. Abolishing this tax inspired dialogue about economic justice, health, and well-being, basic biology 101 reviews with grown adults, and policy change. Our lives at home feed into the fabric of global change, unintended. So just want to start off with the economic justice bit. The tampon tax repeal was more than a bureaucratic adjustment. It was a systemic shift for economic justice. Although sales tax on period products generate a very small fraction of state budgets, typically less than 0.01%, any law that generates revenue is challenging the change. But still, there has been progress. 5 years ago, 40 states had a tampon tax in the US. That number has decreased to 27 today. According to the World Bank, every year lost due to period-related absenteeism cost the global economy an estimated $115 billion. That is a huge amount of money. By repealing the sales tax on tampons and other feminine hygiene products, it's estimated that women in New York now save approximately $10 million annually. Since 2016, that's $10 million a year when purchasing menstrual products. And of course, dismantling stigma, having these conversations happening in press, in schools, in government buildings, help decrease stigma. Taxation of menstrual products perpetuated that stigma around periods and reinforced the notion that menstruation is shameful or taboo. And statistics show that when girls have access to menstrual education, their school attendance improves, which is one step closer to breaking the cycle of poverty. A study also found that college-age women experiencing period poverty were more likely to be moderately or severely depressed compared to those who didn't face this burden. But most of all, in my opinion, also being a native New Yorker, New York is famously known to be the melting pot. It is a hub of diversity, and you have so many different communities from around the world that end up immigrating to New York. So normalizing conversations about menstrual cycles in government and policy level changes also brought that home. People were having these conversations on dinner tables where these conversations were not happening, and they bring that back to their community, creating global change. And I think that's very specific to New York. New York City also became the first city in the nation to offer free menstrual products in schools, prisons, and shelters. This move promoted education and dignity for those who menstruate and also normalized these new dispensers in public spaces, igniting conversations amongst boys and men at home as well, because it was something they were visibly seeing on a daily basis. Most of all, New York's move was a catalyst for change. It inspired other states to follow suit, creating a domino effect. Today, 29 of 50 states, more than half, no longer impose a sales tax on period products, and this has been within the last 5 years. It also gained momentum globally with the hashtag happy to bleed and hashtag free the tampons movements, and led to advocacy and legal challenges as well. it allowed people to feel empowered to have larger conversations. A Florida woman filed a class action lawsuit against the state to repeal the tax. These conversations were not happening in 2016. 2016 was just 5-6 years ago. So I think that the New York span of the tampon tax led to much wider conversations and to look at more into the global impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry. And yeah, I think that's it. The thing we always kind of brought back was that a bathroom is 100% prepared for someone who's not menstruating. So it's sort of identified as male, but it's 50% prepared for someone who is. And I think that even in public toilets in the UK, I think, you know, like, I don't know, somewhere where you can kind of access food products a lot of the time, and you have more availability in the female toilets to condoms and lube than you do food products, which that's great to have access to those, but I'm probably going to need to use tampons or pads more prominently. So yeah, thank you for raising that point. So next we're going to have Raquel, who I know has slides. So
It's an amazing team, guys.
page the UN budget.
Maybe we just met someone else and I think it's, I don't know how to lift up what you said earlier, actually, because how can we be talking or having a conversation about access and having a conversation about girl power, which has become the topic this week? Think of it about school. And that brings a couple of stigma and things that we also brought up and food, and I think change a little bit how sensitive it is. It's just going to be a presentation with topics that we're going to talk about today, so also this diversity. But actually, I know that the
mic is on.
Oh.
It might be on.
Thank you for noticing.
Yeah, no.
Is that better?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Okay.
So we can speak of the.
Yeah.
10 minutes ago.
Oh, my goodness, okay. Go back and start again. I know. Well, so briefly, I think I wanted to lift up, just said, conversations within at home. And because today we are thinking a lot about empowering girls and young leaders, but the conversations start with mothers or caretakers that with that infant. That is when the conversations begin. And sometimes we forget that adolescence, which is sometimes the time that we want to focus on, is a very short period of time. It's a very brief period of time. Prior to that, it's childhood, and a few years after that is adulthood. So I'm glad that you brought that up. So anyway, we do have about 500,000 individuals that lack proper access to menstrual products. And this is the statistics as close as May of 2023. And in India, which is what I am familiar with as I work with this topic, about 23 million girls drop out of school due to the lack of proper access to menstrual health management. I mean, if we look at statistics, it's almost like a country. It's almost the size of Taiwan. And then so we talked about period poverty, which is as another reinforcer for those of you that may not have heard about it by now. It is a lack, we refer to it when it talks about the lack of access to menstrual hygiene products, safe and hygienic sanitation facilities, and the ability to manage menstruation with dignity. But as I want to lift up my colleague here that talked about, it is not just the period. The language has provided limitations in the cycle rather than just concentrating on what goes on. But wait, I am working with a very dynamic team in Lucknow, and this is what they wanted to say. But wait, so we have research issues, and I will give you all the references at the end, but we do have several research pieces that talk about how it has disempowered women, disrupted their mental health and their well-being. We have several studies. One of the ones that I want to point out that I'm familiar with is the one in Barcelona conducted by Dr. Macy, which was actually published in the Journal of Medicine about a year ago. And they took a sample of the population of women in a country that is developed, and they found that the correlation for mental health issues such as depression and anxiety was extremely high for women that had no access or limited access to menstrual habits. Obviously, stress and anxiety are typical things that happen during menstruation, and menstruators do exhibit these symptoms as a natural process, but managing menstruation in an adequate form contributes to heightened stress and high anxiety, especially in impoverished areas. Self-esteem and confidence. Self-esteem and confidence are issues that usually adolescent girls may be going through in the average typically developing adolescent. These are issues that may come across, but it does exacerbate even more during the periods where girls are not allowed to move on or go to school, and that the stigma exacerbates these issues much, much more. So it ends up in social isolation. Girls may feel isolated, excluded. Social activities are not allowed because in many cultures it's associated with the taboo. You know, if we look at the literature, we have many references that suggest that it is a sign of unhealthy pride, not being allowed to be in places because of the menstruation. So definitely that impacts on the self-image. We can go on quickly so we can answer the questions. Social comparison is a very normal process during adolescence, but we have to remember, again, it doesn't start just with adolescents, it starts also in many girls as young as 9 years of age. Identity formation is going to give a change in how girls will shape their own identity based on how the perception goes around menstruation and access to products. And then we know almost 50% of women experiencing period poverty have depressive symptoms. Okay, and we didn't have enough that COVID came around. And I have lots of articles, not too many that I can share with you at the end. And they're at the end of this presentation that point at the impact of COVID, not just in the general population as we know, but in women lacking access to products and undergoing through menstruation during COVID. And then we have specific countries. One of them is Egypt, when they reported that they had issues during menstruation because it was considered a social taboo when it comes in contact with water. And water not being always available in some of these nations. The same situation in Nepal and India, where many girls are forced to stay in a hut or sleep away from the general home because they're going through menstruation. Going, because we're going to talk about that. We covered already, we're going to talk about gender identity and then the mental disparities, mental health disparities. We're probably going to go on that too, as how it is less available. Is 10 years in the making. Land Foundation is a non-profit organization in India. We are now close to our 10th anniversary, but the focus was in empowering girls with minimal funding because it is very, minimal amounts of money can do way a lot in small countries and in small villages like Eleanor Roosevelt was reminded where for you guys, start with small communities. And then I'll talk more about the program we have now. Right now, we have 3 divisions that are very active, and we started with 10 girls in one of the districts in Uttar Pradesh about 10 years ago, and the numbers are increasing. They're close to 2,000 right now. So we are very excited about all that. Let's keep going because then I can answer the questions about that. And this is one story, and I know this girl personally, actually. And I just want you to look at the final part. She requested some money from one of her relatives. And at the end, she says, well, Didi, you know how well all used to saving up our pocket changes or even the pocket money received from our parents and relatives to buy something special. Well, the idea of period back is the same. Buying sanitary pads is something special for us. I love this girl. She's amazing. That's another story. I'll tell you more during our time. Yes, it will. Yes. So from empowering girls, and started with period poverty, expanded to the main topic. It's about education. It's about education begins at home. Education begins at home. Education begins at a younger age. And that is one of the things that we need to expand is educating parents and grandparents and caretakers to start having those conversations as early as toddlers and visualizing. Let's move on. This is a project that we're working on right now. And I think I'd probably like to stop at this point. The bibliography is available. You can write to me, or you can send me where to find all this information and the research pieces. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. And I think that this is going to really lead nicely into my next speaker. It's this element of, again, how far education can go. And I think that when there is an education, the stigma and taboo kind of feeds into that, in the sense of you don't understand what's going on in your own body. And I think that the damage that can do in terms of kind of distraction, and then, like you said, that comparison is massive. So yes, our fantastic stand-in of the next speaker, who I think will really add to the conversation, particularly of your medical background. So yeah, Dr. Mehek, given your role as a medical professional, what has been your experience with stigma around menstruation in medical settings, and how do you see stigma as a kind of contributing factor to period poverty?
Hello, I'm Mehek, and yes, I'm filling in. I don't have a fancy presentation, but I'm going to start with a story instead. And while listening to all of your wonderful work and at CSW in general, I started thinking about how I was given comprehensive sexuality education. I come from India, so it wasn't very fancy. We didn't have a lot of books. The language wasn't very appropriate. It wasn't very inclusive either. This was quite a few years ago, but I remember being in a room with about 400 other people and being given comprehensive sexuality education. And at the end, there was an open question. Does anyone have any questions for me? No one was going to ask questions about sex when there were 400 other people present in the room, all of their peers, all of them giggling. Well, 6 years later, I was in medical school, the first year of med school. And that's when I decided I needed to be different for someone else. Even if it's 1, 2, or 3 people, that's enough, but I needed to be different. And so I went to a school. I talked to the girls there, and in the meanwhile, I also had a separate group of volunteers who were talking to the boys. A lot of people ask me, is that a good idea? Why are you separating the girls and boys? Why are you doing that? It was because I remembered how I was so afraid to ask questions. And that's what CSE is. It's questions. It's not just theory. It's not about giving them a biology lesson that is going to be a part of their curriculum anyway. It's about young minds asking you questions. And through those questions, we started talking about PCOS. We started talking about endometriosis. Kids started asking me, but ma'am, if I am still pure when I'm on my period, why can't I go to the temple? These questions were very difficult for a first year medical student. I was very out of my waters. But about 5 years later now, having graduated from med school, having talked to more than 1 million medical students from around the world, I can assure you, these questions are difficult, these conversations are very uncomfortable, but they need to be had. Throughout the years, I've had the opportunity to talk to people about PCOS, about premenstrual distress syndrome, about endometriosis, because as we talked about, period poverty is not just not getting pads, but once you have them, there are still so many questions that remain unanswered. And I often tell people Google is not the best option. It might give you some answers, but you're not very sure about the degree of the person who's writing those answers. Not only that, okay, we started the conversation about menstruation. But what about the end of menstruation? What about menopause? Nobody was talking about that. And when we talk about period poverty, we often think about little girls who don't have access to period products. But what about women going through menopause? As Sandeep wonderfully said, these women are taking care of so much more than their homes. And menopause, believe it or not, is not as naturally comfortable as you would think it would be. It really isn't. Even though menstruation is a natural, physiological process, it's not comfortable. It's not natural in any way for the people going through it. Which is why it becomes unnatural for medical professionals to talk about it. Believe it or not, there's a lot of stigma even within the medical community when we talk about menstruation. We often think, why should I need to talk about, why should I talk about this when it's going to happen anyway? It's not a disease. It's not like I need to, if I don't talk about it, they're not going to have it. Or if I don't talk about it, something's going to go wrong. But so much does go wrong because we don't talk about it. When you bring your child in for vaccination, that's normal. When you tell the parents you should be careful about measles, about chickenpox, about rubella, all of that is normal. But what about toxic shock syndrome? What about the fact that if you don't take care of your children during the menstruation or even beyond that, during the menstrual cycle, so much more can happen. Period poverty isn't just about the products, exactly what we're talking about here. It's about a range of other things that can go wrong, and all of these things are going wrong because we're not talking about it. Luckily, I had the chance to come into contact with multiple medical students over the years. They were all from different regions, different backgrounds, but all of them reported the same thing: stigma. Stigma and taboo about menstruation, something that's supposed to be natural. Well, with stigma comes mental health problems. As we talked about earlier, mental health that is supposed to not have anything to do with something so physiological often becomes an issue, and again is ignored in period poverty. Not only do people suffer from depression, anxiety, and stress around their menstrual cycle, but also premenstrual distress syndrome is something that is largely unresearched upon. It's simply not important enough, even though 50% of the population is going through it. One more topic I'd like to talk about, which unfortunately I would say not only at CSW, but in general in CSC programs, in dinner table conversations, in a lot of conversations is missed out upon, is menstrual health and disability. Just because someone suffers through a disability does not mean they're not going to menstruate. And we don't talk about that enough. I agree, you put pads in the bathrooms, but are the people able to access these pads at all? There are a lot of questions that remain unanswered. Period poverty is much bigger than it seems. A couple of statements will not be enough to cover period poverty. And as we were talking about before this, is 2030 enough time? I really wish 2030 was enough time, but the topic is much bigger than we think. So I'm very excited about the questions ahead. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. For your contributions. And I think that, that's the kind of what we're trying to get across with the event. And we've kind of had these discussions, particularly like, colleagues yesterday, etc. Is that our menstrual cycle. I think that there's so much negative connotation, and there is for some people a really negative association with it, with the experiences they have, but also it offers so much. They give you a genuine insight into your entire body and your health, and it's something that like this superpower that we just aren't taught how to use. So we're walking around with the superpower, just not using it. And kind of going back to the earlier point of working or living in a world that isn't really built for people who are kind of on those different kind of cycles and not those 24-hour cycles. So thank you very much for that. So yeah, our next kind of section is again to open up the floor really to kind of contribute with the questions. I'll ask a question to the panelists, but interject, engage in the conversation if you've kind of got points, or if you actually want to ask the panelists a bit more about that kind of topic. So we'll try and focus on, as we'll go back to Dr. Now, but we'll kind of focus on the education and the awareness part of it. So in terms of kind of the education, how can comprehensive sexual and menstrual health education programs be integrated into schools and curriculum to ensure that all students, regardless of gender, receive inclusive and accurate information? So I'll let you kind of start. But again, if people have got points to add, put your hand up.
Well, as I said earlier, I think comprehensive sexuality education should always be culturally appropriate. One problem that we have within IFMSC, the organization that I'm mainly involved with and have had the wonderful opportunity to be involved with, is that we work over 5 regions. We have more than 130 countries that are involved with us. While that seems like a wonderful thing, it also poses a very big question: inclusivity. Information that we provide is not universal. What I can talk about in the US might not be okay to be talked about in India or in any other country. That's why CSE is not universal. CSE needs to be culturally appropriate. You cannot feed it to someone with a whole plate. It needs to be tiny spoonfuls, one bit at a time. So even if you're doing your own little bit, that is enough. Not only that, CSE needs to be scientific. That's where the role of medical professionals comes in. Whatever you're doing for your bit in comprehensive sexuality education, seek medical professionals. It is our job as professionals and in the medical field to provide this information. I often say, and I've said this to multiple medical students over the years now, is that your duty as a doctor is not just to wear a white coat and sit in a building. It's to teach people about health beyond that building. So reach out to medical professionals, reach out to doctors and ask them to talk to people. If you're an organization, if you're a civil society representative, reach out to medical students, reach out to medical professionals, because I understand there's a big barrier between the medical system and everything else. But the society cannot change by itself when it's a health-related issue. And yeah.
I'd love to ask you a question to build on that, because something that I've always wondered, and I would say about 8 to 10 years ago, when I was thinking about the same sort of questions and pondering the same thing, my thinking very much stopped at the point of, oh, well, we bring that to legislation and we've managed to get that across. However, in the last few years, I feel that I've learned through the hard way that it's not just top down. You've got to, exactly like Tandeep was saying, everything starts at home. And even if all of these integrated school programs are sent out, but if the parents at home or if the communities, how do you manage to bring them along with you as well as bringing the governments? How can we do both? Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. So the first event that I ever did as a medical student was a menstrual health awareness. All medical, all scientific. That's what we did. And as I said, it needs to be culturally appropriate. Once a child hears something in school, they will want to know more. That's when they go back and talk more about it. I understand it can be difficult to talk to parents, to talk to communities, but it also depends on how you do it. keeping parents and communities at the center of the responsibility is very essential. Because I often also explore the role of men in menstruation. And the role of men is often considered as a barrier, but it doesn't have to be. They are also stakeholders in menstruation. When one person, so for example, if they're the breadwinner, or if they are the financial support of the house, if the woman in the house or the person who's menstruating undergoes a medical condition, they are going to be the ones who have to pay for it. Keeping people at the center of the responsibility makes them want to listen. And that's what you want here. You want people to listen.
Yeah, just really quickly, I'm so fascinated by what you're saying, and especially because kind of what Olivia was talking about. You know, we're saying go to your parents, go back home, have these conversations. Something that I've come across is that because there's so much diversity in women and how women experience their menstrual cycles, oftentimes the conversation gets shushed into, it's really not that bad, right? Or you can't handle it. You know, you're like, I did it, why can't you do it? I never took pain medicine. Why do you have to? And I think that's why it's so important for medical professionals to give the variety of degrees of, you know, what your menstrual cycle can look like. Often it's like, hey, you're gonna bleed 28 days, you're gonna feel these symptoms for 7 days, and what about somebody that's fainting? You know, what if somebody that's throwing up? And they don't want to have those conversations out loud because it's like, well, I'm something in me is clearly not working the way it's supposed to work. And I think it's so sad that we don't even get that perspective from the medical community. And at home, it's, you know, often, it really depends on how your house is, right? And if you're not experiencing, you know, if you're experiencing a different story, your story can make you feel smaller. And then that then leads to the generational, you know, trauma of just being quiet and, you know, being like, well, clearly I'm faulty. And, you know, that's why I shouldn't be having these conversations out loud. So I'd love to, you know, hear a little bit about what conversations you have with your peers to be able to address that. But I think I will also pass it to Raquel so we can maybe bump off, because I know somebody else had a question as well.
I like this interaction, and I think in order to have conversations with the medical staff, with peers, with your parents as adults, we need to start in childhood. And I think early intervention starts at home. And I think we talked about that, and that is a universal variable. It happens everywhere across cultures, and we have several research pieces that support that. And regardless of the culture, or where you are from, or your language, or accessibility, the majority of humans want what's best for their child. And I think that what we need to start having a conversation, and I'm glad that we have several physicians here, is if it is at home, that the child is delivered at home, then have conversations about, well, prior to that, we don't wait to have the child to learn what it is parenting. In some parts, you learn it through your neighbors, you learn it through your village, you learn it through your ancestors. In indigenous communities, you learn it by listening to the chief of that community or the woman chief in that community. So you listen to your ancestors about techniques to bring their child. And then also one more thing is we need to have involvement of parents in decision making. And I think they become part of the schools when they have a voice, then curriculum adaptations will take place. And your principals or headmasters or program directors will listen to the parents. So start early intervention works, learn about ages and stages. You cannot talk, like you said, you cannot feed steak to baby, you cannot bring information. You have to know what the developmental cycles of psychological development for every child is, and those are universals. Sounds like he has a question.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much. I'm really excited and so happy that I'm part of this conversation. My name is Jane Anyango. I come from Kenya, from a slum settlement called Kibera, meaning I interact every day with girls facing period poverty. The topic, the title of this event attracted me, period beyond the products, because it has to be beyond the products. Periods are very personal. You feel yourself. You know your own personal experience. Somebody else can just advise. I work with girls. I've told you a little story about this girl, and that was the reason why the topic really attracted me. This girl is called Maureen. Maureen, just a day before her exams, during the lessons, her periods came, and she had serious cramp, serious stomachache. She couldn't concentrate completely. No, it wasn't rehearsal, it was her first exam day. She couldn't concentrate. And because of period stigma, she talked to no one about it. She didn't ask for permission to go out. She was a very promising young girl. So, she stayed back even when people were leaving because she had soiled her dress. She got home late and she had to be beaten up. She was going to sit for exams the following day because girls growing up, when they delay, people assume that they are having some good time with men. So Maureen did not pass her exams because of her periods. And because she was coming from a very humble background, and they expected that she would get scholarship. So she didn't get her scholarship because she didn't pass. She had to go to a local school. We had to really intervene for her to go to a local school. Just a week before her main exams, this is a different one, the mother died. So again, she didn't pass her next exams. She doesn't know what her future holds for her. So this is how serious periods conversations are. And thanks so much, doctor. Thanks for saying that it's all different, it's so complex. But how well do we love ourselves enough to talk about issues affecting us? My slogan at work is Jipende. Jipende is a Kiswahili word meaning self-love. Love yourself. When you love yourself, you speak out on issues affecting you. You don't keep quiet. We have girls who have fungal infections, who have experienced fungal infections. They don't talk about them because anytime they talk about their private parts, people think that they have sex. So you can imagine a girl with fungal infections with a pad sitting in class. We talk about girls missing school because of their periods. Maybe the pad is there. But if the pad is there, you can't wear a pad because your private parts are bruised. Can you see it in class? Can she go to the toilet? In Kenya, we still have shared toilets. So she goes to the toilet, she's having her periods. There's that drop of blood in the toilet, and the next person coming in is a boy. So the boy is going to know that she's having her periods. Is she safe? They start rolling her around. Maybe the girl is not staying with her parents. Maybe the mother is not there, she's staying with her male parent. And the male parent doesn't understand anything about pads or about periods. So how does she just start the conversation? So it's not just about the curriculum. It cannot just be parents at home. It's a conversation that we should have everywhere, even within the religious settings. Because we are all products of menstruation. Whether we like it or not, we should try as much as possible to normalize the conversation around menstruation. Without menstruation, there is no conception. Without conception, we cannot be here. So this is a very, very important topic. This is a big conversation. I wish this place was full. Because if you ask me, this is one of the best discussions that we are all supposed to have everywhere. Thank you.
Wow, yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head. So if you want to join the panel, you're welcome to. But yeah, thank you very much. We'll move to the next section, which is kind of looking more on the policy and advocacy side. But again, we'll kind of open up to the floor sooner and hear from everyone else as well. But yeah, so kind of directing it a bit to Tandeep on this one. But what policy changes are needed at a local, national and international level to address period poverty comprehensively, including access to menstrual products, education and healthcare services? It's a big question.
Thank you. I'm actually, often when we talk about the stages of policy, our local, national, and global, I'm going to start at home again because to keep it relevant to, the flow of conversation. At home, Beth, then you said something earlier, how we have the superpower. We're just walking around, half the population just walking around with the superpower and shamed into thinking it's not, shamed into hiding it, which is so ridiculous. And that's so much about our society. And it reminded me of a quote. I'm definitely going to get it wrong, but something Albert Einstein said about like, if a goldfish thinks the best it can, it's supposed to climb a mountain, it's going to think it's stupid its entire life. And I think that's really how so many of us are forced to function. And, we're talking about countries like Kenya, we're talking about the United States, and I really see very little difference despite the increased access of resources and education we have here. And I think the conversation at home that we start to have, and I know Raquel has said multiple times now, start with the kids, start with these conversations. And I think the biggest thing to start with is talking about and just normalizing the different stages and normalizing being able to talk about how shitty it is sometimes and what we go through. Because I swear nobody besides know what you go through, but then when you talk about it, then the norm is just everybody knows what we go through. Everybody's going through it. We're just not talking about it. So it's really ridiculous. And I think that oftentimes the closest people in my life will not really know what's going on. And we could be having conversations. They have no idea that I'm actually dying inside. So I think that on the home level, that's definitely where to start. When it comes to larger policy scales, I think local is really where my heart is at, because I think there's so much space to create change there. First and foremost is having free menstrual products in schools and shelters and public spaces. So of course, schools and shelters play a pivotal role, and we want to advocate for free menstrual products in schools, colleges, universities, so that girls can have an uninterrupted process. They can be able to, learn freely. But also shelters and safe public spaces should provide menstrual products as part of basic care packages. So a lot of the work I do, outside of this is based in domestic violence. And I know we've already started talking about Meg, that a lot of the things that we do on a local scale needs to be culturally sensitive, culturally appropriate. So in the community that I work, predominantly with this like South Asian community, there are really large numbers of domestic violence there as well, but it's around 1/3 of women worldwide, so that's not South Asia, but worldwide that experience some level of domestic violence, whether that's verbal or physical abuse. But one of the most common tactics of abusers is isolation and cutting off resources. So a conversation that we've had is a woman cannot and does not have access to money. And now the people in her home are purposefully trying to keep her, restricted. Where is she gonna go to get resources? Where is she gonna go to get help? Where is she gonna go to get products? Where is she gonna go to escape? And in those communities, we found that the two main areas that women really do go to are grocery stores and faith centers. So whether it's church, whether it's mothers, whether it's gurdwaras. So if those spaces, which are very public, don't have access to resources, whether that's, a flyer saying, call me for help, or sanitary napkins or other products that can help with menstruation. And those are the only places women are going, then what tactics are they using? And then what, diseases or infections are they dealing with at home without access to anything else? So I think that it's so crucial that along with other educational resources, these spaces offer menstrual products for women beyond just schools. Similarly, local NGOs, community centers, and grassroots organizations, I believe, play the most vital role. And that's because they're the ones that can be culturally sensitive, because they're working on such a local scale. And they can weave cultural understanding into their approach. And if they don't, it's just not going to work. So something like, tailored messaging, storytelling, especially if you're speaking to, more conservative groups, use religion, use cultural conversations that they are familiar with to have the more difficult conversations. If you're talking to men, use the men, center them and center money, and all of a sudden things will get done. Similarly, adapted products. If you're talking to a group of more conservative, women that come from smaller communities or even immigrant communities, and you're talking to them about tampons, it's going over their head. You have to talk very specifically. You can talk about rags, talk about sanitary napkins, use their vocabulary. And I think most of all, if we're able to manage community workshops and specifically for men and boys, I think that that's really powerful, because these men and boys go on to be fathers. They go on to be husbands. They go on to be spouses and partners. And I think we are doing ourselves a disservice by having so many wonderfully women-led conversations and organizations, but we're only speaking to women. I feel like we're talking to, people, it's just echo chambers, because we all know what we're going through. It's really getting the message across past that. On a national level, I think New York's tampon tax repeal, like New York's tampon tax repeal, every nation should abolish taxes on menstrual products and start seeing them as necessities rather than luxuries, because that in itself dictates how much of the conversation, we're changing. We need to classify menstrual products as essential items eligible for governmental benefits, including SNAP benefits and food stamps. And the other thing on a national level is curriculum integration, which I know that we started talking about a little bit. Schools should incorporate comprehensive menstrual health education into the curricula, including stigma, taboo, and healthy practices. On an international level, ideally, it would be wonderful to establish some sort of menstrual equity task force. A coalition of nations committed to eradicating poverty, including environmental sustainability when it comes to products. And of course, countries that have the access, the resources to these conversations should be front and center of that. Access to healthcare policy should guarantee access to healthcare services related to menstrual health. So whether it's endometriosis, whether it's OBGYN appointments, that should be considered in our healthcare policies, while also having menstrual health clinics, establishing specialized clinics, or integrating menstrual health services into existing healthcare. And globally, making menstrual hygiene products affordable and accessible for all is the most crucial bit. Proposals to reduce or eliminate taxes on these products have gained prominence worldwide, and countries like Bangladesh, Kenya, and Nigeria have taken steps to remove taxes on these products nationwide. I think that in a lot of the conversations that we're having, it's, again, like we said, it seems daunting to think of it as on such high levels, especially when you're thinking global, when we're thinking national, but there has been so much progress in just the last few years, with just a couple of organizations coming to the front. And we're seeing that nationwide. On the panel yesterday, we were hearing from an NGO from Costa Rica, and they are doing, wonderful work, and it just seems so implementable. I think that it would be wonderful if so many of us work together. I had no idea something like FiOS existed. It would be so wonderful to be able to even gather our skill sets together to be able to create change on an international level, and also take whatever works for us in our communities from each other.
Thank you. Yeah, no one did want to ask anything, but I wanted to go to yourself and talk about kind of where you're providing the products and kind of topping on to making sure there's access to items.
Yeah, that's really it's a really hard one, because I think one of the lenses that I see is that affordability of these products, and I think even in the last 2 years, so in the UK in 2021, 12% of women couldn't afford period products. That almost doubled into the next year to 21%, which is the wrong direction. If 1 in 5 women in the UK are unable to afford their own period products, up from the year before, how do we start implementing these on that global and wider thing? It, like you say, it feels like this unattainable target for us to be able to go to. I also feel like we should be bringing in conversations from the industry. When I look at it, because of the fact that we manufacture our own products and speaking to other people within the industry, it has become a heavily commoditized industry. It is very different from fashion and cars, where there is that additional, people are willing to pay more because it's a commodity where people are like, they can imagine saving up for their new favorite bag or their new favorite pair of shoes, because it's also, there's a social proof element where you can go out wearing your nice shoes. People can see you wearing a nice bag. But if you've got the latest generation period pad on, no one can see through your underwear to see that you're wearing that. It's not a conversation driver, and it's not something that is easily talked about. And so I found that within the industry, the drive for innovation to lower the costs of sustainable products down, there's an inherent gap, I think, between being able to bring affordable products where plastic is inherently cheap. It's easy to make, and of course, therefore, it's easy to put into everyday products. However, the plastic reaching into the most absorptive part within that vulva, being able to transfer all of these forever chemicals into bloodstreams is something that is a brushed aside part, because I often find that the conversation goes, but we're providing the period products, full stop. And I think, how do we bring in the right people within the industry and also the funding organizations to be able to provide more access towards sustainable products, plant-based, bio-based products that are able to not add to this vicious cycle of plastic and period products, or being able to therefore I find that the industry is sort of splitting. I think within the last few years, you get these really affordable products, which are super cheap to produce, easy to put across, but then once you're using, for one woman who on average produces around 240 of these products a year, and then if you look at how many women are in one country, and then that's just becomes an annual thing, and then we turn around in 10 years time saying, we've provided all of these period products to these women, but now what? Now these women are faced with a huge issue of having to manage that climate change issues. So I'm not saying I'm not the answer. It's something that I still try to do daily within my work. But I think we need to have the conversation, bring in the policymakers, but also the industry people who can actually bring in their understanding of why these things have been so difficult, where the extra investment needs to go into. I think a huge amount of investment needs to be put into the supply chain. When we look at this, everything that goes into our sustainable products, our unsustainable, or even our new sustainable ones, are all virgin tree pulp. This is not sustainable. Why are we not investing in recyclable pulp? This is something that is perfectly doable. We have the technology to do it. We just haven't implemented it. I think it's a logistics problem as well, considering the fact that, but I'd like to open the floor to anyone else, because you'll get me talking on this for a long time.
Yeah, no, thank you. We'll move to the taboo and stigma kind of part of this bit. So Raquel, this is kind of like more tailored to you. Again, intervene if anyone doesn't have any questions or points. But yeah, how can we challenge cultural taboos and societal stigma around menstruation to create more open and supportive environments for individuals experiencing period poverty?
Well, we cover almost every aspect of the multidimensionality of menstruation. And as I said, as a psychologist, I believe in early intervention. I also believe in parent education. I believe that the conversation needs to start early in the process of childhood. And I also believe that the conversations need to happen in the environment of day to day. It's not that you're going to make a date or you're going to bring it up during the few days prior to the menstruator to have menstruation. You have these conversations on an ongoing basis. You also need to become aware of how to access the smaller communities. And in my experience working across several contexts and in a variety of cultures, is that in some places it is almost not disappointing, but you need to bring respect to the way they have been doing things. And sometimes this is the way things are. And I heard that also as someone from New York. You go, you try to implement some change, you try to change policy, and then you hit that wall where they say, well, this is the way we've been doing it for 25 years. Well, we have communities that we work on with. This is the way we've been doing it. I sat in a small village in Lucknow where it was discovered actually because it was separated by a bridge that was built together as they were creating this new road. There was not even awareness that this village existed. And they have been living for thousands of years perhaps, so we just don't know for how long, but that's the way they were living. And when we came in with our group out of the Milan First Steps and First Stages almost 10 years ago, the person that was in the community, who was the head of that community, we all sat on the ground and we had conversations. And at one point, someone, in retrospect, was trying to say, well, how come you don't send your girls to school? How come you don't do this? And then, very much calm, I will never forget him. I learned so much as well. We've been doing things like this for many, many years. And the fact that you're all here is a good start. Don't you think so? And we will go, yes, he is absolutely right. So small steps, small stages in education. Moving to the context of the United States, probably those of you working with policy, and perhaps in the UK and also in India, there are school boards, you have policies, you have state legislations. If you want to do something in Queensborough, then you will have to go and talk to the Board of Education, get approval, get in the minutes. You're lucky if you can have a conversation, and then you have some of the parental community that are not into, you're not going to teach my daughter or my son about sex education, and I'm working in school that day. And they're very powerful, and we know that, those of us that work in education. But the parent community needs to be informed, they need to be work with kindness, but sometimes, even in the state of New York, even in the United States, you have to cut your losses. If you can implement through reading, I believe in books. And one of the things that, one of the things that I'm concerned about as a psychologist is that when we stop talking to our children, because we are replacing the dialogue with our own technology, and I don't know about you, but I observe young parents, and parents of all ages, by the way, they're taking their children to the supermarket. In the past, we used to show and point, even if language is not there. Oh, what color is that? Oh, what color? Oh, look at that. Oh, look. And there was a dialogue. Well, now it's been replaced where the child is in the supermarket cart and the parent or even the caretaker, so I'm not just pointing to parents, is on the phone. And the child is looking without any reference of language. We need to build language. We need to have conversations. The conversations don't have to be with large amount of language, because pointing non-verbally, non-verbal language, which is so common in so many cultures across the world, pointing, showing, picture books, having them in the kitchen. This is how you build up your communication. And something I've heard today is trust. If we start bringing trust into organizations, into community, then we can have the first building block. The same thing happens with childhood. You need to build that trust. Regardless of your culture, adjust it to your culture. Trust, communication, dialogue starts in early childhood. So that's how I will make some change.
Thank you. I'd love to build on that because something that I personally feel would be one area to focus on is expanding the language around menstruation. Even how we talk about products themselves, I fall foul of this, but I was always taught that they were sanitary pads. And that inherently makes it feel like, why is it unsanitary to be using this? And so I've been very conscious about changing my language to period pads or menstrual products. But also when we're talking about how our bodies interact with these products, I think often we see the word vagina. But we should be talking about vulvas, we should be talking about all of the different ways that we should be accurately representing our bodies. And I think one of the ways that I can think about is, you know, Eskimo, like they have 50 different words for snow. And what you know, we only have one word for snow in the UK, well, of course, because it hardly ever says that. But I think let's start by expanding the language on menstruation. Let's start about talking about what the different kinds of pains are. How do we label that? What is the moods that we talk about? Exactly like you were talking about there. So that was just one area that I would love to see expanded and talked about more, is adding to that language as well.
So we'll move on to the last section, which is, going back to you, Olivia, talking about that climate change and sustainable solutions, kind of part to it. So while addressing period poverty by ensuring access to menstrual products, not sanitary pads, is crucial. It's essential to consider the broader impacts, and kind of as we've spoken about, is trying not to put create or rather solve one problem and then creating another, and kind of really trying to tackle the lack of access, but also not contribute to the environmental impact. So could you kind of discuss how we can ensure our efforts to alleviate period poverty are environmentally sustainable and also don't kind of put the burden on, as you mentioned, the person using the product, but actually the companies, and kind of how you try to avoid that, going back to ads and the products?
Thank you. I often think back to a quote, and I need to figure out who it's from, so I'm not gonna say who I think it's from. But if the masses realize how much power they had, then they can change everything overnight. And I think that is something where, as the consumer, we often hold ourselves to a much higher standard than we hold organizations and companies. I think back to my own personal experiences, I would be standing in front of the shelf thinking, what is the best product that I can choose? You know, vote with my wallet, not with my wallet. But I also, what I really think we should start doing is, instead of holding just ourselves accountable for the right choices, we should be holding these companies and organizations properly accountable. And I think all of this starts with local government, and it's really hard because it is slow change, but by trying to create this ground bottom-up movement where we can start immediately the short-term sort of impacts that I think the companies will feel is often voting with your wallet. I often realise that is a privileged position to be in. So I think those who have that privilege should be able to exert that. And those who aren't, we should, you know, turn to voting. The voting turnouts in the UK is awful, and I don't know the voting turnouts in the US, but it is something where I think getting the younger generation to get politically active, and often I find that you know, they say that there's two things you should never talk around the dinner table: is religion and politics. But why? These are things that are so important to our society, so important to who we are as people, that we should be able to have, you know, disagree agreeably. And I find that in our modern society, it can often end up in these echo chambers, exactly like you were saying, where we are too afraid to say certain things which are not agreed by everyone, but being able to have it into a forum where we agree that not everyone will have the same perspective, but by able to have those sorts of conversations. And so to sort of bring it back to that point around climate change and sustainable solutions, I think those who are consumers, I think if you are personally in that position to be able to vote with your wallet, that is something that is an immediate change that, trust me, will have a quick turnaround within the market. And often I find that when the consumer market has made certain changes, even though I would like it to be the other way around, regulations will often catch up because the consumers will vote. And so I think those who are in that position should be able to make that decision to be able to do so.
Excellent. Well, yeah, if anyone does want to ask any questions, do raise your hands or kind of contribute to the discussion. But otherwise, we can we'll kind of close up. And yeah, again, thank you everyone for all kind of your contributions there. And hopefully that again, this conversation could go on for hours and hours in terms of the layers to period poverty and kind of how much it covers. And I think that we hopefully just touched the surface with kind of the reflections from the panelists. But yeah, I kind of just want for a reflection from this event and hopefully kind of changing the status quo. And again, this is kind of just as we've all discussed from every single position, it's this idea of it's just conversation. That's how it's going to start. That's probably the biggest position we have is our voice, and it's normalizing it. And I think that so often, particularly in today's world, like you kind of were talking about, Olivia, I think there's such a nervousness to be wrong, so we don't say anything, and hence why language or talking about menstruation or anything like that, if you're not sure, and probably not because of lack of education, you're actually going to be quite nervous to have the conversation in the first place because you don't know what typical is or normal is, and you don't know kind of how to talk about this conversation. So yeah, some of the kind of key points that I always try to like bring the end of the events to is that, again, as we mentioned, bathrooms are 50% prepared for menstruators and 100% prepared for non-menstruators. So starting to change that with access to items, as Tandeep was mentioning, in as many places as possible. Menstruation is unfairly taxed as a luxury good, and menstrual pain is probably the only severe pain that we actually normalise for people, which again has been raised here. So thank you so much for that. And yeah, we kind of acknowledge that menstruation has been stigmatised and underrepresented in education and is used as a tool for discrimination. And so through events like this, virtually and in person, we aim to kind of shed light on this and to start to look at how menstruation has been used almost as this weapon to discriminate against those who do menstruate. So yeah, we would love for this conversation to kind of continue, and we will have contact information here where you can kind of connect with us, but also with our panelists. I mean, we've got the room for probably the whole night, so do reach out and actually ask for their contact details, but we'll also put it, we'll send the slides around as well. But yeah, thank you so much for those who attended, and particularly for those who attended online as well. And massive thank you to our panelists.